on my far right is Dr. Joan Gabel, who is the Chancellor of the University of Pittsburgh and Vice Chair for Academia of the Council on Competitiveness. Many of you met last night our new Vice Chair for Business, Dan Helfrich, the President and CEO of Deloitte Consulting. Our Chairman Emeritus, Chad Holliday, who's also the Chairman of the Global Federation of Competitiveness Council, among many, many other leadership roles in the world and country, and Dr. Tom Mason, the Director of Los Alamos National Laboratory. Well, I'm going to just jump right in with our discussion because I know we have a lot of important things to say. And so I might change the order a little bit and start with you, Chad, because we were just talking about sustainability and climate, and you were the founder of the World Business Council for Sustainability many, many years ago. And this was when you were CEO and chair of DuPont, and I'm sure many people didn't even think this was, what were you talking about? But could you share a little bit about the journey to sustainability and how it's transformed, but why it's more important than ever today?
Well, sustainability is so critical to competitiveness around the world. Through the Federation of Councils on Competitiveness, just last month, we had 22 different countries gathered face-to-face at the Gallup headquarters in London to talk about innovation and what's going on. And what I find is so many other smaller countries are doing things we should be doing ourselves. So I think the world is catching up to what has to be done to make success, and we need to learn from that. I find so many times it's confusing, exactly what is sustainability, how is that with competitiveness. It's fundamentally about doing things smarter and better. There's a lot of discussion you'll find today about, should we be focusing on taking natural gas and taking out the emissions and capturing them and focus on that? Should it be wind? Should it be solar? I'd say the most important thing we can do about energy is the energy we never use. It's efficiency and effectiveness. And there's no reason in the world why this country couldn't lead at that. No other country is reaching out to lead at that. So I think we need to find those things as a country that we can lead. Because in the situation going forward, it's going to be highly competitive. It's going to be with China. Take offshore wind, for example. We know we need offshore wind to make the equation work. Right now, China has more offshore wind up and operating than the rest of the world put together. There's no reason why we couldn't be competitive in a place like that. So that's some of the challenges I see and big opportunities, Deborah.
Thank you, and we'll come back to that. Joan, let me also just turn to you since we're talking right now a little bit about the global arena. We were honored that you and our member Joss Parker and Steve Ashby joined us in April for the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Accords in Belfast. The Council on Competitiveness and the GFCC were one of the core partners, and it was an amazing honor to be there. But our group talked about the place-based innovation and what needs to be done to build these vibrant economies in partnership with the United States. So I thought I'd just ask you to comment a little bit on that, and then we'll follow up with your real job at University of Pittsburgh.
I'd like my real job to be to go to 25th anniversaries of major moments of peace. I think that would be great. That every day. So the 25th anniversary celebration of the Good Friday Accords was a very visible moment, I think, for all of us. It seems like a long time ago now, given how much has transpired globally and geopolitically since then. But what I thought was very interesting about the celebration, as Deborah's question implies, is that the discussion of peace and the opportunities in the region were only minimally focused on government, on what it means it was on now what, and how do we take advantage of the moment we find ourselves in, uniquely hosted by a university. So, of course, I come into that and with my colleagues thinking about how what we do catalyzes and accelerates place-based innovation, that we are by our definition in a location, and for many of us primarily serve students from that area, have research happening that is inspired by that area, but how if we do that well with the right partnerships, with our antennas up, looking to our left and looking to our right, we actually can catalyze far more than the research and teaching that we do and be a contributor to stability, growth, and then obviously innovation and next chapter for a community. And we had a really unique opportunity to talk about it in a place that had no stability and was remarking so profoundly on simply 25 years of stability and how important that was. So it was a very interesting conversation. It took directions that we really weren't expecting that I think were very fulfilling for all of us.
Thank you, Joan. And, seeing Senator George Mitchell honored by Queen's University and his remarks was very emotional. He said that this was really the highlight of his life, to be the negotiator, as did President Clinton. So it was part of the council's aura and the GFCC, and I thought we would share that for all of you and hope that many of you will come with us as we carry forward in the year ahead. So, Tom, Hollywood's made you famous. I was at the opening of the Oppenheimer movie. I kept wanting to see you somewhere. Maybe you were hidden among all the Los Alamos extras that were there. But the movie, of course, captured the pivotal role of the creation of Los Alamos, the work that you did at the forefront of knowledge, of technology, dual use for national security, and having a mission that brought together the best and brightest talented people. I think fast forward, the laboratory, and you're representing Los Alamos, the laboratory system really plays that role still. It's changing with terms of the challenges. But share with us a little bit about, how you see the evolution of the laboratory's missions in the Department of Energy and the incredible strategic partnerships you're forging between university and academia to advance our collective future.
Yeah, there's a section in the middle of the movie where Robert Oppenheimer and General Groves are traveling to universities across the country to recruit scientists to come to Los Alamos. They go to Princeton and University of Chicago. And then shortly after that, they're walking down a hallway with laboratories on either side, and Oppenheimer is saying, we have brought together the best and the brightest from around the country, focused on solving this pressing national security challenge. And we talk a lot today about the pace of innovation. Fission was discovered in December of 1938. By 1942, at the University of Chicago, there was a sustained chain reaction, and by 1945, there was a bomb to end the war. So fast-paced innovation is actually not as new a thing as we think it is. And certainly part of the role of the national labs is to marshal those forces, the intellectual capacity in the universities, the power of US industry on the most pressing national security challenges. An example that we just celebrated last week was the successful completion of something called the Exascale Computing Project. On time, on budget, over $1 billion of federal investment, involving very, very close coordination between the national labs, the technology community, and academic partners to help develop the codes that run on these machines. And over the course of this year, we've already fielded the first exascale system, Frontier at Oak Ridge. Aurora at Argonne is on the way to completion, and it'll be followed by El Capitan and Lawrence Livermore National Lab. Now, in order to get to an exascale computer, we recognized we were about to hit a wall. Moore's law has been bending over. We no longer get those gains for free. And what we did, we decided rather than climb that wall, we'd drive around it. And the way we drove around it was by using these so-called accelerated systems with graphical processing units, GPUs. The really exciting thing is that those systems are amazing computational engines for modeling and simulation, but they are also outstanding machines for artificial intelligence, highly optimized for that. In fact, at Los Alamos, we're really excited. We'll be taking delivery of a new system called Venado in April, which is a partnership between the lab, NVIDIA, and HP Enterprises. It's going to be the first, and probably for some time only, US-based supercomputer based on this new Grace Hopper architecture. We are very, very fortunate that we ordered it in 2021, because if you want one now, you've got to get in line. And of course, that's because of the explosion of interest in machines that can support these kind of large language models, massive data sets. And I think that's a good example of how we use the forcing function of pressing national needs, whether it's in science and energy or nuclear security to drive developments at a pace that meets those needs and do it in a way that I think will have substantial, broader economic benefit. And that was a good model in 1940, World War II. And actually, it's a good model today. In fact, for a long time, the US kind of was nervous about too much engagement in industrial policy. But the thing we knew is if we drove science and technology in support of our national security, it would have huge economic payoffs. And I think in today's environment, we certainly find ourselves in that kind of world again.
Before I turn to you, Dan, I want to just follow up, Tom, with something very important you just said. Of course, in the application and use, and sometimes the unintended consequences. So many don't know that the original work that led to the Human Genome Initiative took place at Los Alamos. And you're also, and we'll talk about this later during the day, playing very important roles in the use of these tools in the health revolution and modeling and simulation for drug discovery and design and accelerating. Could you talk a little bit about some things outside of the core national security dimension, but that have great implications on U.S. competitiveness and standard of living?
Well, certainly, I mean, you mentioned the example of the Human Genome Project, which wasn't just Los Alamos, Livermore was involved, Berkeley Lab was involved. And actually in that same sort of area, you have this really interesting connection between human health and big economic consequences and well-being consequences of that effort. There are national security dimensions. And in a way, we sort of saw this with the pandemic. It wasn't obviously a military threat. It was a naturally evolved threat, but it kind of reminded you what could happen, the disruption that could occur of something like that. And I think as much as I would like to forget the pandemic, we cannot forget the pandemic. And we need to do a lot, I think, to be better prepared. And there are certainly tools that we have, not just our supercomputers, experimental tools, the amazing tools of synthetic biology, which are going to both help us in terms of human health, and also we need to be prepared for the next pandemic whenever it may occur. Influenza of 1916, it's kind of like a 100-year frequency thing, and the next one might not be that far away.
Thank you. Dan, I mentioned last night that in leading Deloitte Consulting, you have some 80,000 people on your teams, and prior to that, you led Deloitte's federal government business, really bringing the most creative, advanced solutions, ideas to your clients. And of course, leading digitization, how we drive the advanced manufacturing revolutions combined with energy are big, big problems. But could you share a little bit about, the talent imperative? How do you attract 80,000 people around the world? And what are some of the big things your clients, if you can share that, are concerned about and that you are adding value to their solutions?
Well, Tom's got a blockbuster Hollywood movie to attract the next generation. I know of no films in production about accountants and consultants. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Look, this is a moment where the intersection of competitiveness and those topics with technology attracts the best and brightest minds in this country. And so the attraction equation is about creating platforms to communicate to prospective talent that you're going to get the chance to apply your learning, your education, and innovative technology in contexts that change the course of society. And that context might be in applied research at a university. That context might be in a national lab, or that context might be as a consultant supporting the huge range of companies and governments that we do. So that's the look, that's the central pitch. Now, interesting in this moment, you asked a little bit about manufacturing. We do a manufacturing outlook every year, and it is the most optimistic U.S. manufacturing base we've seen in quite some time. Particularly when you ask medium to long-term questions. And why is that? Well, you have enabling legislation that we've talked about a bunch this morning and last night. We look at the amount of investment in sustainability and semiconductors and clean technology manufacturing. We're talking about 20x what it was in 2019. So the environment for this moment is outstanding. And then what we all need to do, and again, it's one of the reasons I love this group, is the intersection between higher education and manufacturing is so profound. And so those organizations that are able to show agility, which Joan and the team are setting a great example for in Pittsburgh, to agilely adjust degree programs, to combine them with certifications and micro-credentials, to create environments for students to be ready to work and apply those skills and those credentials in a way that advances competitiveness. That's what's happening, and that's exciting no matter which domain of the economy you happen to be a part of.
Thank you. And I know you are aware, and Janet and our other partners in Deloitte, that starting about 2013, we did a series of major reports with Deloitte on the Global Manufacturing Competitiveness Index. And when everybody thought U.S. manufacturing was falling off the cliff, the actual data that you all were able to pull together from around the world showed that the U.S. had a very big future going forward. And I think it's playing out now as well.
It is. And now we have more dollars and more enabling legislation that will accelerate even further.
Thank you. Joan, and then I'm going to come back to Chad. You're relatively new now as Chancellor of University of Pittsburgh, and one of our other council members, Carnegie Mellon, is there. And I grew up in Akron, Ohio, and we used to go to Pittsburgh to go to the art museum and things, but it was the heyday of Westinghouse and big manufacturing. But your city and area is an innovation hotspot now. I mean, what's going on in Pittsburgh, and how is UPitt and Carnegie, but your whole system really optimizing now this future?
Well, I think Pittsburgh is sort of a straw man for the discussion on place-based innovation in a lot of very interesting ways. And, as I look around the room, know many of you are, and certainly my higher ed colleagues in the different communities that we serve, there are different spots within the United States, and we're a very diverse country, where there are different incentives, and those have yielded different outcomes, some of which have been very tax-based, some of them are just locationally interesting, et cetera. But in Pittsburgh, we had, for decades, the steel industry, of course, that was absolutely core, never going to go anywhere, always going to drive the economy. And then all of a sudden, it wasn't. And so you saw that part of the world, that part of the country dip in ways that seemed as if things were going to go off of a cliff. And I know many of the people who live and work in that area certainly felt that way at the time. But in the way that I think is very demonstrative of our resilience nationally, the community, the Rust Belt in general, and Pittsburgh certainly is having a renaissance where, anchored in discussions about alternative energy and new energy and how to leverage manufacturing know-how in things like biomanufacturing or in other areas that are forward thinking, and having the very good fortune of two research universities that are longstanding collaborators that have very synergistic strengths that allow for things that are greater than the sum of their parts in partnership with the industry there and with the foundations there that were established during the steel heyday. And so between the deep ties and investment in the community, the remaining industry partners who are still very strong but have a very forward-thinking appetite by virtue of what happened with this roller coaster ride, and these research universities that have very compatible strengths, we're seeing real growth. It's distinctly place-based. It would only happen because of where we are and who we are, and yet it has certainly national and international impact and potential for the things that we think universities contribute: new talent development, workforce development, in all the ways that Dan iterated, from micro-credentialing up to doctoral degree programs, the entrepreneurship ecosystem, and also policy development, so that this kind of energy can be transferable and translatable into other communities.
And I think you're marrying the tremendous expertise of healthcare and biotech at UPitt with a lot of the work at Carnegie Mellon that's more on the computer side and AI and things. I guess there was controversy when Uber came. Was it Uber and came and stole a lot of the talent at Carnegie?
The driverless car technology, and yeah, that was before my time, so I'm not going to can't speak to that. But I may have heard a rumor or two about that. But there are a lot of overlap. I mean, all of us at comprehensive universities have overlapping programs and overlapping areas of excellence. But if you look at signatures of the last 15 years or so, at Carnegie Mellon, it would certainly be AI and robotics, and at Pitt, it would certainly be life sciences and bio. And so those are very compatible when we think about where innovation is happening going forward, that we work together on quantum, we work together on AI-powered biotech and biomanufacturing, we work together on AI-powered epidemiology. When you think about how these things can overlap, it's an ecosystem. And it creates, I mean, we have, I would say, healthy competition in the way you want to have with a neighbor. I mean, there's a reason why Home Depot's across the street from Lowe's, right? But the idea of what that allows for when you think about the next chapter for our country and the positioning of our country as a place of innovation, it feels very vibrant and very positive being right at the table.
Well, you know, Chad, you were our chairman of the council, as I said, when you were CEO and chair of DuPont. And I think a little bit ahead of the curve in thought leadership, because nobody was even using the language, you led and inspired our work around resiliency and enterprise resiliency. And actually, Jerry Cohen from Carnegie Mellon was the co-chair of that. And then fast forward, kind of a back to the future story, that work came back and was revitalized and updated during the pandemic. But now, with the issues we're facing in climate and geopolitical, resiliency is again at the top of the list of what we need to have in our systems. Could you talk a little bit about that and how we then transition to building the integration of advanced manufacturing and energy? We couldn't look at one without the other.
If you go back to that study you're referring to that Jerry and I co-led, it was right after 9/11. It was a council that was going to anticipate the next big thing. You know, assumed it wouldn't be a 9/11, something else. And we had this gigantically long list of things, so many we didn't think we could deal with it. And what was not on the list was the great financial crisis. So we missed the next big one that came, totally. So what we concluded from that, even before we missed that, we said we got to be resilient. We got to be strong. We don't know where the next punch is going to come from, but we have to have resilient systems. We have to have people that are trained to know why they're doing their jobs, not just what they're doing. And what we've seen is looking at organizations from the council standpoint that have done that, have been able to deal with whatever the crisis may come up, would be COVID, et cetera, to happen. So I think that's an important learning. I look today, and let me just give you two examples of things that we just need to do right now and people in this room can do something about. The IRA has given $7 billion for green hydrogen projects. About 7 different hubs have been identified around the country. The real need is what are we going to do with the hydrogen, not just making the hydrogen. The biggest application right now is export our U.S. taxpayer dollars of hydrogen to Rotterdam to run their port. I don't think that's the right answer. The answer is finding uses of the hydrogen here. And that's where all the council, research universities, labor unions, business need to be forming organizations in each one of these 7 places and start right now to create the uses for hydrogen, a really concrete thing we can do. I think the other thing that's really critical to us is if we're even partially successful at transitioning our economy away from fossil fuels and CO2 emissions by mid-century, we're going to have the biggest infrastructure build out this country's ever seen in just 2 or 3 decades. We are not ready for that. Let me just give you one example. Our permitting system is broken. There are so many ways to slow down permitting. Offshore wind, if you do a very thorough job, do it right, all the right studies, 2 years is plenty of time. It's taking 5 years because the system is just broken. We need to get together now and find ways to protect all the people involved. I'm not talking about shortcutting, but speed up our permitting system right now because we're going to need it for the decades to come. So really concrete things I think the council can lead in.
Well, I know when we were doing our energy security, innovation, and sustainability big initiative that traversed the Bush and Obama administration, we had a little controversy over whether to have a tax on carbon or carbon trade, and you were the one who resolved it. I don't know if you remember that, but I remember in the call. So I wanted to ask you, do you see some of those policies going forward now? And also, were you surprised about the announcement at COP28 about the need to rapidly ramp up next generation nuclear?
No, I think that was the particular thing around nuclear. I think is critical. We just won't get there without that, and it's very important, and it should be done right in what's happening. I think there is an opportunity here, and I think that's what people keep missing. They see as a problem. Now, I certainly won't take credit for making the decision whether carbon tax versus cap and trade. Right now, we're not doing either one very well. I recall when we were in those conversations with a group of senators off the record, there's a very conservative Republican senator. I was describing how cap and trade would be better because you get the money in the right place and so forth. He says, that's awfully complicated to me. I don't know why you just don't tax the stuff. Yeah, and he said, but if you say that outside this room. So I think we have just got to find ways to level the playing field to get these technologies up and running. The RA is a good step forward. In a way, it's a tax on the U.S. People because we have to pay those taxes. So it's another way of doing it. I wouldn't argue too much about the way. We just got to make some concrete progress right now.
Well, I want to turn in the time we have to the 4 pillars of the Council's National Innovation Commission about sustainability writ large, scaling and developing the exponential technologies, the workforce issues, and place-based innovation. We've been talking about it, of course, each and every one of you. But let me start with you, Tom. We're going to issue a report probably right after the election. It will come out because we don't want it to be seen as, the council is very, very, it's in our DNA to be bipartisan. So we don't want to be seen as influencing one or the other in terms of an overt document going out. But right after the election, we will release this. And so we can't have a list of, 100 recommendations. So what are some of the things within that framework, and you could choose any of them, that you really think we have to push the envelope on? I'll start with you, Tom.
I think in terms of speeding up the pace of innovation, I'll pick that one. I'd like to go back to a remark that Chad made about permitting, which of course was specific to the offshore wind, but actually I think it's a more general challenge. We have seen a big ramp up of investments, federal investments across a lot of areas. Seems to me like that budgeting environment is tightening a fair bit, and we may not see similar kind of scale of investments going forward. And therefore, I think it's incumbent on us to figure out ways that we can make more effective use of the resources that we have. And whether it's, environmental permitting processes that are too long to get to the, ultimately get to the right outcome, protecting the environment, protecting communities and people. But, we ought to be smarter about how we get there. And I think that's true. Certainly, I would say that's true for those of us who are more within the government sector. There are a lot of processes that we have built up over time for very good reasons that layered one upon the other tend to slow us down. And I don't see this as an environment where we can afford to slow down. I talked a little bit about the tremendous AI potential associated with these wonderful new machines that we're fielding. You know, that's a field that is moving super, super fast. An executive order was just released. We're starting a budget process, you know, for FY25. There's going to be like another 2 generations of large language models, you know, before we get to budget outcomes that are going to be able to impact. That's a very, very slow process. And I think we can do better. We have the historical examples that we talked about. And I think it's really important for us to be, you know, drilling down on some of those things that are impediments to progress, the difficulties of partnering across sectors. You know, I love my general counsel, but, you know, we got to find ways to strike agreements between labs and companies, you know, that don't take so long that the venture-funded company sort of says, you know what, your technology is great, but you know, I've got to get to an IPO, and I can't wait for that conversation to converge.
And that's, of course, also an issue about the investment in emerging startup, medium-sized companies in the valley of death. When that occurs, we're seeing foreign capital, not always from friendly nations, coming in to acquire that intellectual property that was created in the United States. But on the regulatory and the permitting and all of that, I think we have the model of Operation Warp Speed. I mean, when you think of how long it took to get those vaccines out versus the traditional process, because it was an emergency and a crisis. Dan, when, you know, and again, I know your clients are proprietary, and so there are things you can't talk about, but can you share what some of the issues that we're going to be working on in this next phase of the commission are really important to get right and solved to help both business and government accelerate?
Let's build off sort of what Tom and Chad have talked about in permitting, but I'll take it from the pillar of talent. One of the biggest gaps I believe we have as a country is the absence of multi-sector aware talent. So when part of the reason we have the permitting challenges we have is we have a group of government leaders, government employees in a permitting process that lack the peripheral vision because their experience, their professional experience has been single sector and single domain. And so how do we as a group make it more comfortable and predictable that people's careers can move between sectors? And people get nervous about some of that, particularly if you're talking about private versus public sector and you talk about revolving doors. And I agree with the risks around that. But I will tell you, I have found some of the savviest outcome-oriented government procurement officials, for example, who have had real experience in other domains that allows them to apply the right thinking still within regulation and law and the best interest of the taxpayer dollar, but with savviness about how to tap in to the innovation that comes from the private sector as an example. If I look at our employees, those that have multi-sector experience are the most successful over time. And sometimes they get the multi-sector experience within Deloitte because we serve so many different parts of the global economy. But often they get it because they've done a chapter in high tech, and they've done a chapter in professional services, and they've done a chapter in nonprofit. And how we can create institutions and policies and laws that increase the volume of multi-sector, multi-domain talent, the positive externalities from that will be profound.
Joan, we all talk about innovation occurring at the intersection of disciplines.
Yes.
And in the university world, it's still pretty conservative with faculty departments, whether it's chemistry or physics, and actually having multidisciplinary programs for students and researchers to get degrees is not easy. Do you see the universities being able, and the leadership, breaking through some of those stovepipes to accomplish this synergy of talent and interest and looking at things in different ways?
I do. It could go a little faster, sort of looking at my colleagues around the room. But ironically, some of the greatest incentives for university research that ultimately becomes the foundation for innovation comes through pretty high fenced-in sectoral distribution of research support. And so as the distribution of that support starts to grow and its incentives for multidisciplinary research teams and interdisciplinary research teams and larger research teams all becoming incentivized, so the universities go. So it gets at the core question of collaboration that has permeated everything that you've heard from this panel, that if the funding agencies incentivize collaboration, then the disciplinary work will follow. And then that starts to permeate into the educational pipeline, even all the way down to K through 12 in many ways when we look upstream, for the very reasons that Dan's saying, that if we want our students to graduate into premier employment, and the employers are saying we favor students who've had this kind of experience, well, we're going to react to that. It's going to be driven like any other supply and demand conversation would be. And what's getting better, in addition to the specific things that I described, like the partnership with industry and employers or the partnership with the funding agencies, is we're actually, and I see this as the biggest shift, even though it's incremental, anticipating these questions and starting to develop educational requirements, applied experiences, incentives for research that anticipate these needs. We were reactive as a sector for a very long time, and we're becoming better and better at being proactive. And I think it's starting to show. And it would be nice to talk about that in higher ed instead of some of the other things that have occupied the conversation for the last little while.
Well, we've talked about resiliency and regulatory impediments and things. I'll ask this to everyone before our last question comes, but do you think in our nation and across all the sectors represented here, we have lost the tolerance for risk? I mean, I think of John Paul Jones, our great naval hero. Those who do not take risk have no rewards. So is there a tolerance for risk now in our major institutions? And if not, is that something we want to encourage without crossing the line?
I'll go first,
You
since
go first.
I think higher ed is probably viewed as having the lowest risk appetite of the different entities represented here. I would say that as an entity, it's not generally wired to appreciate risk. We've been taking risks. We may be taking the wrong risks. And the journey in that, as I see it, like a lot of things that go very far to an extreme, is that when we settle back down, which is coming either on its own or by the pretty intense exogenous pressure that we're all feeling right now, that we will have been able to reframe our risk appetite. I'll give a simple example, speaking of not forgetting the lessons of the pandemic, which would be in the way in which we embrace technology and the distribution of content in our classrooms in subject matter areas that would have been absolutely sacred up until the pandemic, and now it's taken as table stakes in how you create classroom experiences. And that's just a tiny example. So the idea of risk in higher education would come in the type of programs you launch, in the type of research you pursue, and we've been pushed in both of those areas of late. And while I wouldn't say it's been a smooth ride, it wasn't a cliff, to use your earlier imagery. And so I think our risk appetite is better and going in the right direction. And it needs to be, because I think the higher ed role is as the foundation for virtually everything else that you've heard described as the opportunities.
Well, Dan, you have to make that balance with your clients all the time about risk and not risk and where to push the envelope. Do you want to comment?
Yeah, the risk appetite of our clients, I'd say, is on the rise, actually. And anytime you deal with larger enterprises and institutions, and most of our clients happen to be on the larger side, you have the risk that there is institutional calcification of process that sort of defends and protects the status quo. And that was the case 20 years ago, and that is the case. That's the case today. What I think the best organizations are doing as they think about risk is the intersection of risk and trust.
Yes.
And our most effective clients are actually starting to measure trust in a really concrete way. We've actually come up with something we call Trust ID. That's an algorithmic way to measure trust in an organization that builds on things like NPS that have existed before. But in an age of AI in particular, trust is going to become the currency by which those who take thoughtful risks, if they bring their employees and their customers and their regulators along the journey with trust in mind, then the return that comes from the risk will be significant.
Chad, you took big risks at DuPont when you were the person that created the whole framework around environmental safety and health.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to an example in history, and Tom kind of reminded me of this. Let's go back and see what's really worked in this country, how we learned. TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, in the late 1930s, there were major floods in rivers. We saw that as a big opportunity to create dams, build lakes, but also generate electricity off those dams. It was a massive program. Why was it successful? It was successful because they recognized the regulatory issues and gave TVA some regulatory authority to make sure you get it implemented. So I think if we can go back and look at examples like that, Los Alamos, the space program, where have we taken great risk and what have we done to make sure it's a success? And then just apply that, different details in the future, but the concepts I think will be the same.
And doing big things for big problems.
Yeah, we got some big problems, so we need some big things.
Tom.
I don't think it's so much that there's a reduced appetite for risk as I think sometimes we misapply, where we see the risks. And sometimes we forget to factor in the risk of not getting something done. And so yes, we need to manage the risks associated with, being late or over budget or that sort of thing. But we also need to factor in, if we don't get this done, then there's going to be harm from that too. That harm may be, reduced competitiveness, loss of industrial base. It could be, in our world, a system that doesn't make it to the Department of Defense in a timely way to meet their deterrence needs. So, I think it's more a question of getting that balance right of, what risks are we trying to protect against? Because if we just overly insure ourselves against every possible thing that will get wrong, we will realize the risk of not getting things done. And that will absolutely come back to bite us.
So this is our last little set of provocative comments. So whoever wants to go first can raise their hand. We have a new president. Hopefully we haven't had an election like the last one, but we have a new president. And you each have a few minutes to say to he or she, what's an important thing we have to do for U.S. competitiveness? So sort of the elevator question or comment, because you won't have much time or attention. So what's the important thing that we need to do? And we can overlap, but who wants to go first?
Well, it is a competitive global environment. It's important that we protect our assets, but part of the way that we win in this competitive environment is by going faster. So we can't solely focus on slowing down our competitors. We need to be looking at what we can do to allow ourselves to go faster. And if we pull both those levers, I think we will be in great shape.
Deborah, it's a difficult question because depending on who that is, it might be a very different answer. But I think I would say to whoever it be that our relationships with our partners around the world are critical. If we think we can go it alone without partners in other countries in multiple ways, we're kidding ourselves. So make sure you value those.
Yeah, I was thinking pace and speed just as Thomas. And then to build on the theme, there's a lot of things the president and administration can do at the intersection of speed and multi-sector collaboration and integration, and put those things together, and there's a real yield.
I'm going to elevator pitch for investment in the talent pipeline, and
Investment.
in the talent pipeline, and ensuring that everyone has access to high quality education and therefore has the tools to come up with the ideas that drive everything we're talking about.
And mine is going to be, let's invest and mobilize our entire country to be an innovation country, from coast to coast and throughout our country. I think, for me, in my career at this stage, having been involved with the council's initial work, we were the thought leader in looking at regional clusters of innovation, understanding how parts of our country had transformed their economies, from San Diego, it's a great naval base, it still is, to being a leader in wireless and biotech, and the list goes on. We need that across the depth and breadth of our country. And we need to make the investments across all these to ensure that we have that, and then collaborate with our partners and friends around the world. Well, I think we've saved a couple minutes, which is amazing, because I've been told we need to save a few minutes. So I want to thank everyone and look forward to your involvement over the next year with the commission. And most of all, thank you for being leaders in the Council on Competitiveness and for our country. So thank you very, very much.